Nickel Boys is honestly one of the most impressive things I've seen on the big screen in a long time.
Who's about to fall? He's about to fall, El.
Turner! This isn't the fight!
Nickel Boys comes from director RaMell Ross, who was nominated for Best Documentary Feature at the Oscars several years ago with his debut film, Hale County, and he's back now with a narrative feature that is nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. Not a terrible start to a career. I'm gonna preface this review by saying that it might be a longer one. Nickel Boys has hit me in a way that very few films do, and I'm going to be nerding out a little bit about the direction, the editing, and obviously the cinematography. It would mean the world to me if you hit that subscribe button and watch the whole thing, because this is a film that really deserves some more attention. The film itself is adapted from the novel The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, which I haven't read, but I am definitely going to now. Ross adapted the novel with Jocelyn Barnes after he was actually presented with a copy of the novel before it was even published. And while the details in both the novel and the film are not true accounts of a Nickel Academy, they are rooted in the true story of the Dozier School, where there was a lot of abuse that was uncovered after its closure, and in fact, multiple unmarked graves were even discovered at the school. Nickel Boys is primarily set in the 1960s and follows Elwood, a young black boy who's sent to the Nickel Academy, a reform school, for essentially being in the wrong place at the wrong time. At the school, he meets another student, Turner, who becomes the other character we follow throughout the film, as they basically go through the daily abuse at Nickel Academy. Part of what makes this film so incredible, as I'm sure a lot of you know if you're watching this video, is that it's shot almost entirely in POV form. So instead of seeing Elwood and Turner in an establishing shot, in a medium shot, in a close, we see every scene through their eyes. And this isn't the first time that this has ever been done in the world of film, but I would say that it's almost inarguably the most comprehensive and effective use of this POV style of shooting that has probably ever been done. From the opening shots of the film, I had chills. Literally, this was common throughout the runtime. There's something almost indescribable about the beauty of this point of view, and I will still do my best to describe it. The cinematographer here is the extraordinary Jomo Fray, who was the DP on another great project recently, Raven Jackson's All Dirt Roads Taste of Salt. And his work here is some of the most incredible cinematography outside of the grand blockbusters like Dune that I've seen in recent years. And of course, it didn't receive a nomination for cinematography at the Academy Awards, but Emilia Perez did. Yeah. Fray worked with Ross for about a month, literally just testing out this POV form with different cameras and lenses and all sorts of rigs, and really just trying different visual and narrative approaches. And what they found was that a sort of like messiness was more convincing when it came to the emotional heartbeat of the film versus trying to have perfectly blocked and choreographed shots, which kind of makes some elements of the film even more impressive, which I'll talk about in a bit. Before I do dive too deep, though, I think we should note that the visuals in Nickel Boys are not gimmicky. They don't ever really feel like they're showing off. The whole concept of a film being shot in this POV form could so easily devolve into a pretentious, experimental undergrad student film, but what makes Nickel Boys resonate so much more than something like that is its intentionality. These visual choices are not made just to look cool. They're almost a necessity in conveying the emotional state and the process of thought and intuition and understanding that both Elwood and Turner go through. That being said, it is still one of the most beautiful films in this modern era of filmmaking. There are so many shots that I could discuss. Some that stand out are the shots that incorporate reflection. We see a character or characters looking into a mirror above, or seeing the reflection in a bus window, or my favorite shot of the film, seeing a reflection in this old iron as it goes back and forth on the ironing board in and out of frame. Fundamentally, we see the camera as an extension of the character, and because of this, we can glean so much about their psychology based on the framing or the focus of the shot. And speaking of focus, so much of this film is shot at an extremely shallow depth of field, which means that very little of what is in frame is actually in focus. And the film plays with this focus so intentionally, again, kind of mirroring the psychology of the character, that we can learn so much by simply following the focus. And this is where I want to give Callie Riley her flowers. She was the first AC on Nickel Boys, and for those of you who don't know, the primary role of the first AC is to pull focus. She was brought on by Fray, the cinematographer, and she was given no marks to hit, which is absolutely incredible when you watch this film. She wasn't told what to focus, where, and when. She was told to read the script and reread the script and get into the minds of these characters so that when they were shooting on set, she could essentially treat focusing like a dance. It's more about the art of portraying these characters than nailing some sort of predetermined focus. And when you watch the film and you see the purposeful shifts in focus, it's actually remarkable what she did and how much creative license she was given. I do realize that I've come this far and I haven't even mentioned the performances, and that might be kind of representative of the film on the whole. It's definitely more about the story and the art than it is about specific actors or performances, but there are some strong ones, most notably Aunjanue Ellis-Taylor as Elwood's grandmother. She's definitely the standout here. The performances from our two leads are not, I would say, pitch perfect at every moment, but I can only imagine how difficult it would be to act directly into the lens when they're speaking to each other's characters, or to have to convey this deep emotion when they're standing behind the lens. The other strongest performance would probably be Fred Hechinger, who's getting a lot of opportunities, it seems, as of late. He was absolutely wonderful in Thelma last year, just as an example. The editing from Nicholas Monsour is also incredible and probably worth mentioning specifically. He's a little bit more established than Ross and Fray in his career, being on a number of projects, and he was able to bring this almost impossible vision to life through the editing. And again, Amelia Perez with an editing nom and no Nickel Boys, but it is what it is. And the way that these shots flow together demonstrates such a deep understanding of these characters, and he takes what could very easily be an abstraction of miscellaneous shots, but he makes sense of them, and it really is brilliant. Part of his job as an editor here was also to incorporate some archival footage, some real and some created for the film, and this is just one of many ways in which Ross and his team kind of subverts our expectations about what POV means. It's not always a literal representation of what the character sees, but sometimes it's symbolic or metaphorical. It shows us what's important to the character. It shows us their thoughts at times. The camera is essentially a manifestation of the character's experience in that moment. And there's times when a character, normally Elwood, is just staring at something in the room. And in these moments, we can see him maybe deep in thought, but we can also see him trying to detach himself by hyper-focusing on something other than the people, the conversation, or the events around him. This sort of POV does shift at some points in the film, and I can't really say too much without going into spoiler territory, but what I will say is that when we have this change in point of view, which occurs in the future, it's, in my opinion, such a beautiful and brilliant way of portraying our character's journey and change, and it's open to a handful of metaphorical interpretations. The way that they were able to capture these gorgeous, unique shots was in part because of the camera that they were using. So they shot this on the Sony Venice, which in very simple terms has more or less a mode where you can separate the body from the sensor, which lets the camera operator shoot essentially with something that's the size of like a slightly above average DSLR. And what this does is it allows the operator to get a lot closer to the action of the moment and also allows the actor to get closer to the camera. They had a bunch of different setups in Nickel Boys. So sometimes they shot handheld, sometimes they used chest mounts or helmet cams or the Snorri cam, which is basically a chest cam that's directed toward the operator or the actor. And sometimes the actor would be rigged up with the camera themselves, so they're both acting and operating, or sometimes they would just reach around the operator to have their hands in the frame. Nickel Boys was also shot on what were prototype lenses from Panavision, which were basically these super fast 1.4 lenses that means, in layman's terms, it lets a ton of light in, and that paired with them being large format contributes to this super shallow depth of field that we see. And the lenses also have this like softer, almost vintage look, which is really gorgeous, and it feels appropriate for the time without kind of giving up any technical quality. They shot most of it, or at least the primary lens was a 40 millimeter, which was a little bit surprising. I thought that it was longer, what they were on most of the time. But what this basically allowed was to create space in the film and allow characters to get a little bit closer together. And yet, because they shot most of it wide open, they could have a very narrow focus if the character needed to hone in on something in the scene. It really is a pretty remarkable piece of art, and I just love when I get fired up by a film. It's kind of necessary sometimes to remind ourselves how wonderful and expressive and all these other adjectives that this film medium really is. What makes me kind of sad, though, is that Nickel Boys has made very little money relative to other projects. I live in a city of over 1 million people, and we thankfully have one theater that's showing it. And when I went to see it in theater, I was the only person in the audience. So I guess I just wish and hope that more people see this film because it is one of a kind. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe, like, comment. All those things help me out. Really appreciate it. And watch the next video when I post that one too. Cheers.